did send it. I don't know.
Screw your grades, bud.
You're just either too good or too.
And I was like, hey, babe, I'm like, you don't mind, I got a little bit of time. Can I put this sticker on? I said, because by the time I go home and go to sleep tomorrow, again, I've had it since January. I've been riding her since January. Like, and you know, people follow me, and they'll never pull me over. But no, Bluefield PD.
Where did you grow up?
Cook. I don't know him. Well, see, when I come through that stoplight before Bella's, he hit it, you can see he put it in gear, so he had me for speed. I was on like 30.
Well, to be honest, I think I was a little
As soon as I seen him.
that I had.
As long as you and I are on the same track, I know that we're not, and I know that I'm not doing something.
And once he said that, and I produced a stick.
Now you got just like focus.
No, but hey, look, I like it that I'm stirring up in you some thought processes. When I get you shaking your head in class, I know we're going somewhere we need to be. I like it. I like it. I do.
I don't quite understand that.
Yeah, look, it's healthy.
He gave me a warning, that's like the fourth warning ticket I have in my car from Bluefield PD. No, I thought it was the first. That's my first.
Who was?
Ain't
nothing to worry about.
No. I'd rather put the daggone sticker on my license plate in January. Oops, my bad.
I mean, as long as.
I'm running on 3.5 hours sleep right now. Come on, people.
As long as you have the sticker, like me, because I don't put on my registration.
What I done was I had this little thing that Princeton PD gave me. Slid it in behind my registration, because I went for that one registration was so good. And then I forgot about it. So when he seen the first, when I pulled that thing out, and he shined a light on the registration card, he said, see, that's out of date. I said, hold on a minute. And I reached behind it and I pulled the regular registration, and the regular registration had the sticker stapled to it. All I had to do was put it on there.
The last person who put the sticker out on, someone stole my sticker.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I thought. That's the reason I hadn't put it on, and I meant to do it. I meant to do it after the first year and just forgot about it. I got a warning ticket yesterday.
You got what?
Warning ticket.
From whom?
Bluefield PD. I forgot to put the sticker on my tag. It says 2017.
Nah, they know better. What is that?
Well, I produced it right then and there, but.
It's complied with law. You go in and the reason you write your tickets because you go in and show it to the court, it's complied with law, they throw it out and you roll on.
It should have had me for speed, really. Because when I came through the light before it fell, I seen him put it in gear. So I knew he was gonna pull me over. But he followed me for like a mile and a half before he kicked the blue lights on. Cause I was actually going like 30 or 25.
I had this guy pulled me over in Tazewell, when I was trying to get to work one morning, it was about 4:30 in the morning, and I went through Tazewell, and,
Oh, Lord.
I went down to Hardee's.
Yeah.
Hardee's, I was going out that way, and it's 25 through there, and I was going 33. He pulled me over and said, you were going 33 and 25. I said, heck, that ain't too bad. I didn't know my car go 25. You know?
Well, when I seen him, I started letting it, I hit the brakes first, and I let it start slowing down. And by the time he pulled me, I was doing like 24. So.
Beckley, how many people are there?
5 of us.
5 today. Thank you. Who's missing? Do you know?
Brett.
Dylan?
Yeah.
That's not like him. Okay, thank you.
Running on 416.
Did you all get your
As soon as I seen him,
test results?
All of us, but Clayton.
I didn't get mine.
What's your last name?
Akers.
I graded it and I put it on there, but you didn't stop in and talk to her?
It's not on.
It's not on there.
It's just
Oversight on my part, Mr. Akers. I graded it. I remember your grade. I will send it to her as quick as class is over, okay?
Okay, thanks.
I apologize.
He knows it's a good grade.
Then when he
Mr.
touches
Akers, you won't be disappointed.
See?
So here's the story for all of y'all who were kind of late coming into class. We'll get started. I'm not going to pass the test back and review them that you all took, because I still have several people who need to take them. Almost 9 folks. So I'm not going to review a test with 9 folks who still need to take them. We will, if you want to see your grade, come up after class. I'll show you your grade. You're welcome to see it. And we'll just move on till people who need to take that test get in there and take it. Okay? So if you're interested in what your grade is, come and see me. If not, I'm not going to review this test because, like I say, I've got 8 or 9 people that still got to take it. We're missing several people again today. So I want us to jump back into the conversation we were having on Tuesday. And I want us to remember we're going to take off all this week and most of next week. Mr. Primerston rolled his eyes at me. We're going to take off our law enforcement hats. We're going to put on our sociology hats again today, all right? I know we're going to a place where Mr. Primer don't necessarily like to go, but we've got to try to make that happen and get there. So I want to start off today with a story. I want to start off with today about a story about a young man named Matthew Shepard. Any of y'all ever heard of him? Matthew Shepard was a college student at the University of Wyoming. And on October the 7th, 1989, he was found naked, tied to a fence, severely beaten, and barely alive. He was taken to a hospital where he lived for 5 days. After 5 days, he succumbed to his injuries. He had brain trauma that he could not recover from. When the police investigation began, they began to put back the last few hours of Mr. Shepard's life. Anybody know who he is now? You do? When you begin to put back his life, put back the last few pieces of his life, the last few hours of his life, he was at a bar known to be frequented by the gay community. He was picked up by 2 men who pretended to be gay, who offered him a ride home. They took him out, they beat him, they robbed him, they stripped him naked, and hung him from the fence to die. He was found the next morning by a man on a bicycle who was riding his, like Tour de France bike, not motorcycle, but actual bicycle. So, I got to move this because the people in Beckley, I'm walking out of their screen. I've just got all kinds of questions. So, to start with, I'm not going to ask the question, is being gay a choice or a genetic predisposition? That's the discussion for another class. What I am going to ask you is, as we talk about culture and diversity and those types of things, does the gay lifestyle have its own culture? Okay, the gay lifestyle has its own culture, and in that culture, are they also as subject to discrimination and hate crimes as is any other minority group? So would you put them in, would you allow them to occupy a minority group status because of their sexual orientation? Or should it be, minority groups should be defined as race, religion, those types of defining things that create a minority group? How do we, in other words, what I'm asking you is, how do we as a society come up with who qualifies to be in a minority group? How does the gay community, people in the gay community, qualify to be in that minority group? How do African American people qualify to be in a
I
minority
guess a
group?
minority is, there's less of you that, you know what I mean, there's less gay people, I guess, than straight people, so you'd be a minority. If we're looking at sexual orientation.
Okay, well,
That's what I was thinking, a limited number in that specific culture.
okay, now,
Specific
I
population.
like where y'all got a good starting point, and I like where we're going. You've got a limited number, you've got a smaller number than the whole group. But there's something else, there has to be a common thread. So what is in that common thread? You talked about the larger group, right? A minority group doesn't necessarily have a different value system, right?
Right.
Minority group's value system fits in with the community, with the entire community's value system, correct? Or at least in general that it does. So a minority group shares the same values, but they're all linked together by some kind of, excuse me, I can't talk this evening, I'm drinking that, by some kind of common thread, right? Some kind of common thread. And so what makes crimes that happen to them, what is the element there that makes those crimes a hate crime? In other words,
They're targeted specifically due to that common thread.
okay, hold on just a second, you tell me where you're going.
It's just not accepted as a normal, or, I don't even, normal's maybe not the right word, but it's like,
All right, tell me where you're at.
You're targeted specifically due to that common thread that is not necessarily present in the majority of people.
Absolutely. So you have this minority group, and the hate crime is characterized by whatever the common thread that ties them to that minority group. Whether it's their homosexual lifestyle, or whether it's the fact that they're African American, or it's the fact that they are Oriental or Hispanic, whatever that is, that ties them, also is the focus of the hate crime. So it's possible to be a part of a minority group and be a victim of a crime, but not a hate crime. But the possibility of that hate crime is about targeting those specific characteristics that make them part of that minority. So how do we identify certain elements when we are creating hate crime legislation that we specifically want to prohibit? Have you all ever looked at hate crime law? Have you ever looked at the verbiage of hate crime law? So I'm not going to ask you to write a paper about it because I want us to prepare for next week, which is going to be our mid-semester exams, mid-semesters. But I would like for some of you to look at the language in hate crime legislation and be prepared to talk about that on Tuesday when we come back to class. I think it's going to lead us down a road to help us begin to identify things that happen in our society that we as a society are going to have to address as far as dealing with multiculturalism. So now, I wanted to talk about that story a little bit. I want to get you started thinking. And now I want to ask you another question about multiculturalism and race. And this question is, you're going to look at me as though it's a weird question, but I want you to think about it. I want to know if race, identity, is a genetic, a biological factor, or a sociological factor? I want to know if race is biological or sociological.
I would say that it's caused by biology, interpreted by sociology.
Oh, I like that.
It's something that is, you know, a decision that someone makes. They don't decide to be of one race or another, but we as a society tend to interpret them because of that biological classification.
So, and I like where you're going. I like your thought process. I like what we're digging into here. So I'd like to ask you this. How did the lady who was and y'all forgive me, I think she was a president of a California chapter of the NAACP, right? She was the president of the California chapter of the NAACP, and she got on TV and she was very vocal about something that went on, and they began to look at her funny because she didn't fit the image of what an African American should fit. Was a member of the NAACP, and when they got to doing the digging, they went to her family and interviewed her family, and her mom and dad was white. And they said, she's not African American. Biologically, she's white. And she said, I was born white, but I identify with the African American race. How did that transition happen in her mind?
Well, the problem is the confusion between race and ethnicity. Race is physical characteristics.
Wait. Hold on, I want to make sure everybody's got you. Hold on, we're going somewhere now. Tell that again.
It's confusion between race and ethnicity. Race is physical characteristics. You're born white, you're born black. Ethnicity is the culture. So if you're white and grow up in a black culture, then you can identify ethnically, I guess, as African American, but you cannot be racially black.
I like that. Good argument. Anybody want to expand? I identify as white, but I have strong ties to Native American population. My ancestry goes back to the Cherokee Indian Reservation. Now I don't, identify with them so much that on Friday nights I put on a war bonnet and war paint or anything, but
You liar.
yeah, I do identify with that culture. And so I guess the point I'm trying to get across to, and the question that he answered is that as we dive into cultural diversity, there is a difference between race and ethnicity, and there is an opportunity for people to maybe be, I was born into a white family, but I identify a lot with Native Americans. I identify with that culture. And so that woman who was the white lady who was the president of the NAACP identified with the African American minority culture. And so as we start to talk about those things, you have to understand that that's kind of where the beginning of and those issues, and wanting to be treated fairly and wanting to be treated as everybody else was kind of the beginning of Martin Luther King's urging folks into nonviolent protests to bring about social change for the African American community in the middle 60s and into the early 60s and on into the early 70s. Why do you think that Martin Luther King encouraged civil disobedience and insisted on peaceful protest? Well, first of all, what is civil disobedience? Well, what's the difference between a protest and a riot? I like where you're going.
When you
It's
start
nonviolent.
breaking the law and throwing rocks at officers.
Well,
It's passive, it's not.
I like where both of them are breaking the law technically.
Yeah.
Civil disobedience is breaking the law, technically. And so is a riot. But the level that, and where Mr. Dillo's going is, the level of violence dictates the difference between civil disobedience and a riot. Civil disobedience is Kent State College students having a sit-in. Right? That's civil disobedience. The most current example of civil disobedience that we've had that was hugely popular 12 or 14, 16 months ago was Occupy Wall Street. That was a prime example of civil disobedience. They were breaking the law, they were nonviolent, they were being a problem, they were creating awareness of their situation, but there was no violence.
So it's against the law to protest?
It is against the law to protest where you impede my right to do whatever it is I want to go do. For example, their Occupy Wall Street, it was civil disobedience because they were trying to restrict the movement of folks around Wall Street. And when you make it difficult for me to gain access to a public place, then you've broken the law. But it's such a minor infraction that if the police act on it, what do they look like? It looks, in the beginning of the civil disobedience in the 60s, when you had the sit-ins and you had the nonviolent protests and the marches, you had police officers in the Deep South who were reacting with extreme violence and prejudice, right? And that caused the rest of the nation to begin to look down there and say, something's not right here. These people aren't doing anything, and yet we get this reaction from the police, right? All these people are doing are marching and holding their sign and chanting. They've not threatened anybody. They don't pose a threat. They're peaceful. They're organized. They're orderly. They're not doing anything, and yet we get this violent reaction from the police. And so now we must go because what the police is doing is not right. They're not right to this group of folks. And I think Martin Luther King understood that if you put violence into the movement, the true movement gets lost in the fact that you created the violent crime, right? Who is a group who is led by another gentleman who advocated violence? He wanted to do
Malcolm X.
motivation by force. Who was it?
Malcolm X.
Malcolm X. Malcolm X advocated violence. The group that followed him as a large group, one of the more famous ones was the Black Panthers. They were a militia movement. Their voice was lost in the violence of their movement. So the difference between civil disobedience and riots is the level of violence. Martin Luther King used the civil disobedience and the marches to create awareness of the treatment of his minority group in order to bring about social change. One of the first ways they tried to, the folks tried to appease the social unrest was with what kind of laws? Jim Crow laws. What is a Jim Crow law? Say again?
Segregation.
It is, but what was the theory behind the Jim Crow laws?
Separate but equal.
Separate but equal. Separate but equal. And what about the Jim Crow laws? They truly were separate, but were they truly equal? No. What was the court case that ended the Jim Crow laws?
Brown versus Board of Education.
Brown versus Board of Education. Good. Well, we ain't got nowhere else. We got that one down. So out of the Jim Crow laws comes Brown versus the Board of Education, and then starts to become real change. Up through the social hierarchy comes the African American middle class, which in the 60s and 70s was a fairly new idea. What role in society has the African American middle class played? Let me put it to you in a different way.
That's a good idea.
30 years ago, 40 years ago, I wouldn't have had the privilege of having the number of African American students in criminal justice class that I have today. Why not? Could they get hired? It's tough. It's tough. Those people had to, the African American middle class had to break through glass ceilings, had to take on opportunities of jobs that were traditionally held by other folks. Jobs that, where they had to go in and compete with, as a minority, they had to go and compete with white and other folks to get those jobs. And so as a result of that, realizing that the playing field wasn't level, what kind of laws were passed around the time of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan?
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action. What did affirmative action say? Their attempt was to make it more diverse, right? Right. But what in the end was happening? The attempt at those laws was to make the workplace more diverse, to make the job opportunities open and equal. In the end, what ended up happening with those laws is that they began to be so misinterpreted, if you will, that not even the African American community liked them, because they weren't doing what they were intended to do. The laws weren't working, so they were done away with. So now we move through, and I want to wrap things back around a little bit toward the criminal justice system. How historically have minority groups been treated in the criminal justice system? Say it again? Not well. What do we mean?
Unfair.
Unfair. I watched a documentary the other night where there is and I feel so sorry for this gentleman, and this is a place where our criminal justice system has failed him. He is in Georgia. He has been on death row for 35, 36 years. He is an African American individual who was arrested when he was 22 or 23, accused of murder. Not long after his conviction, the one eyewitness that they had admitted that she lied, and they have 5 or 6 corroborating witnesses saying that he could not have committed the murder because he was at work some 25 miles away from the murder scene at the time the murder happened, and the state will not turn him loose. They will not overturn his conviction, and they will not let him out. They will not execute him. He is on death row, but they will not execute him. I mean, they haven't removed him from the death list. They just won't execute him. Every time it comes up, they postpone it. It's interesting. It's interesting. I think sometimes as a society, we need to say, you know what? Society's screwed up. We got to fix this. But they won't. They won't address it. So, disparate treatment. We talked about a little disparate treatment the other day when I was talking to you about the cocaine laws, right? Crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. Did we talk about that a little bit? And What are some other ways of disparate treatment that are not quite so obvious? Maybe it's just me. Yeah, they gotta keep the pool hot. Disparate treatment. Somebody talk to me about bond. Bonding out of jail. No, not James Bond. I'm not interested in him. I want to know about bonding out of jail. Bond. Yeah, well, he's a movie character. I'm talking about really Bond. Bonding out of jail. Somebody gets in trouble, and the magistrate sets for them a $10,000 bond. How do you get bonded out of jail?
Put up 10%.
You have to pay 10% to a bondsman, okay? So 10% of $10,000 is $1,000. That sounds extremely painful to me. I hope I don't ever have to go bond, because you don't ever get that back. It's gone. The bond system in and of itself is set up so that the affluent can go home. And who gets to stay in jail? The poor. And typically, when you're looking at who can afford it, can a 19-year-old who happens to be African American, who got caught selling drugs, got a $10,000 bond, is he more likely to bond out, or is a 30-year-old white guy who gets a $10,000 bond? Which one of those is more likely to bond out? The 30-year-old. Right. The bond system is set up to keep the poor in jail. And statistically, young African American and minority males tend to be the poor who have to stay. So there is another way that they're set up. Now, is the criminal justice system getting better? Absolutely. Is the disparate treatment getting less and less all the time? Absolutely. What is the relationship between all minority groups and police? Well, y'all are a talkative bunch when we get down to it, aren't you?
Probably distant.
Explain distant. Help me understand distant.
They don't like each other.
Aha, now we're getting somewhere. They don't necessarily like each other.
Trust each other.
There's the other word. They don't like each other in particular, and they don't trust each other. All right, so we have a dislike, we have a distrust. How does that affect a police officer's job, the ability of a police officer to do his job when they have a level of distrust? What happens? Say again?
I said misleading.
Misleading? Restricts? What else?
It calls them to question, what the right way to handle things are.
Explain. I like where you're going. Explain more.
If you're a white cop and you pull over, a minority person, what is, for pretty much any crime, what is the right procedure? If you use discretion and you decide to charge whoever with whatever, well, you're a white racist. If you decide not to, well, did I do that because they're black? Should I enforce the law? It's a dilemma that the police officers have to deal with often, and it's very hard in the political climate to know what the right call is.
I like it. Where else are we at? Anybody?
To avoid a confrontation because of the no trust, that person's probably doesn't trust you, and you don't trust that person, so you walk on nails to you feel like you should walk on nails in order to avoid confrontation, but you also, the other part of you knows that you still need to do your job.
So how do we as a law enforcement community move forward and try to assure that the playing field is going to be level for all minority groups. Because let's be honest, if we're honest, each one of us in here has something that we carry. Remember I talked about on Tuesday, we got our backpack on and it's our life experiences, right? And we carry that with us. And inside that backpack with our life experience on, we've got things that we are prejudiced with, whether we own it or not. I'll tell you what mine is, and it's something I work on all the time. I have no sympathy, compassion, or tolerance for a child molester. None. I can be sympathetic to a drug user, I can be sympathetic to a drug dealer, I can be sympathetic to everybody in just about every walk of life. But I have a real problem dealing with, on any level, a child molester. And I've got to, as a criminal justice professional, I can't treat them any different than I treat anyone else that I come in contact with. Okay? That's where I have to be. So if we're all honest, in our backpack, we're carrying with us our experiences and our own prejudices. Whatever your prejudice might be, it's in your backpack. You don't have to share it. I don't want you to share it. But what I want you to do, be aware of, is that it's in your backpack. Whether you own it or not, it's back there. So the question he asks is, if I pull over a guy that I know has been arrested and he's out on bond for molesting his kid or molesting somebody else's kid, and I pull him over for a traffic violation, I pull him over for something else, I have to treat him the same as I would treat anybody else that I pulled over. But am I really going to do that?
You may want to, but you can't act on what you feel towards him.
Right. I have got to find a way to treat him the same. And so that question is, if you are, so it brings my next question. You're an African American 19-year-old man. It's 11:30 on Friday night. You get pulled over by a white police officer. His backup shows up. It's another white police officer. How would you begin to feel knowing that you don't trust, knowing that as a 19-year-old African American man, you already you have a distrust of police officers? We've already established that, right? Probably most minority groups have a distrust. So as a 19-year-old African American, you're pulled over 11:30 on Friday night, and you are surrounded by 2 or 3 white police officers. How do you start feeling?
Nervous.
Intimidated.
Nervous, anxious, excited. What else? Intimidated, very alone. So one of the ways that we can begin to, as a police department, as a criminal justice agency, one of the ways that we can begin to work on our cultural diversity, work on the way we're seen in the community, is to put yourself in that other person's shoes. What's that called? Empathy. Empathy. You pull somebody over on a 11:30 on a Friday night, and it happens to be somebody in a minority group. Be aware of that. Have some empathy. Be aware of the situation that you are in. Know that 3 white officers around an African American male at 11:30 at night is going to make him behave differently than he might ordinarily would. Because he's feeling a lot of emotions that maybe you don't identify with, but now we know that they're happening, right? Same thing happens with a female. Female gets pulled over at 11:30 at night. She's on her way home from having a night out with the girls, and they've been out, and they've been watching movies, and they went to a movie, they went to dinner, and she's on her way home, and she gets pulled over, and she is surrounded by 3 male police officers of any race. She begins to feel very alone and very anxious, and she's very suspicious, and she's on edge, because police officers are supposed to protect and serve. But we just had a case not too long ago, and was in Arizona, where that police officer was raping women. He pulled them over and raped them and turned them loose. He just got convicted. Y'all see that? So it does happen, and so she feels very alone. So we need to be aware of how we're presenting ourselves to the public, even or in one-on-one situations, even when the public is wrong. So I'm going to close out with this. Let you all go a little bit early. We'll get ready for what? I'm lost. What I
Oh, man.
huh? Suspicious. All right, I missed something. So we close out with this. If we were in the community that we talked about, and we were 80% white, 15% African American, and 5% Asian and Latino, and we're talking about our police department being a mirror of our society, how would that affect the way our society views our police department?
Say it again.
We're back in our police department, right? We're back in our police department, and our police department is going to be, our society is 80% white, 15% African American, 5% Asian and Latino, and our police department is going to mirror our society. Our police department employee breakdown is going to be just about the same ratio as our society. How does that bring about a difference does it bring about any difference in the way our society views our police department? In other words, what I'm asking you is this. In Ferguson, in the town of Ferguson, they are, the makeup, the racial makeup is 80% African American, 5% Latino, and 15% white. Their police department makeup is 98% white, 2% African American. The way the community views their police department is with suspicion, distrust, all of the things that are being viewed at, because they look at it as though they're not a mirror, they're not a mirror of the society. If that police department in Ferguson were a mirror of the society, if that police department were 80% black, 10% white, 12%, and then 3% Latino, how might that change the perception and the relationship between the police department and the community? Would it change it?
Yeah, it would definitely help. It wouldn't fix the problem,
So, yeah,
but it would help.
I do believe, as it is here before, they just call them Uncle Toms, and they just don't trust them regardless.
And I've heard that before. So what you're telling me is that as our African Americans, as our students who are getting ready to go out into the law enforcement community, are going to be ridiculed not only by the white people that they may encounter, but also by the other African American people that they encounter. Is that what y'all are telling me?
Yes.
So tell me more about that.
Police are just another minority group.
Wow, that's interesting.
Without a community policing effort, what race your department's made up of is going to make, a difference, but it'll be a small difference.
All right. So I'm interested. You all got me interested. Help me understand where the feeling of betrayal comes from African Americans to other African Americans who are getting involved in the criminal justice agency.
Badge and shield.
Badge and shield. But it has to go deeper than that. There has to be something going on deeper than that. What is it? I saw you shake your head. Yes, tell me what you think it is.
went over to the other side and betrayed the black culture.
So it's a betrayal of culture. Yes, no, maybe.
I don't know.
Absolutely, yes. Well, you agree with me.
You've been treated wrong for all these years and now you're joining them.
Well, yeah, a
You're joining the people
reputation,
that you
cops
that
have
they
a
distrust.
reputation of, you know, criminal versus not criminal. There's a line, and there, a lot of times, you know, people hear about the line being crossed.
So you're saying that the police are the criminals?
There are police officers who were criminals, and that reputation may put out, well, if they are, why would you even want to be a police officer?
Police officers have a reputation of being crooked?
They have
That's all you
been
hear
known
about.
to be.
That's all you
Trust.
really hear about the good, you hear about.
Yeah,
You don't
trust,
really- you don't-
mistrust.
The police are a minority that it's okay to paint with a broad brush because of the actions of one or two people. Whereas normally, when you paint a whole minority based on one or two people, you're wrong.
Do you think that becomes a problem? We discussed that last night in class just a little while. Do you think that becomes a problem? Do you think that becomes an issue? Because when police officers, regardless of race or ethnicity, when police officers put on a uniform, we lose that humanistic idea of who they are? They're a
Absolutely.
uniform, right?
People are afraid of.
An authoritarian figure, and so what we forget when people put on the uniform is that, you know, that's somebody's daughter, it's somebody's wife, it's somebody's sister, it's somebody's mom, it's somebody's brother, it's somebody's uncle, it's somebody's son, it's somebody's dad, and they just become a police officer, right? And so they lose that humanistic element. And so when you lose that humanistic element, then it's easy to paint them with what he termed as that broad brush, right? All right. So I set all of this up because on Tuesday when we come back to class, we're going to begin to discuss racial profiling in police work. The pros, the cons, the good, the bad, the history, and the future. So Tuesday when we come back, we're going to talk you can put your police hat back on, and we'll talk about racial profiling. All right, any questions? Y'all have a good weekend. Try to get everything caught up. We'll get ready for midterms next week. No, the only thing we got is, just make sure the PowerPoint, and I'm gonna try to get our discussion questions online. No, we just had one. Yeah, we just had one. We're not gonna have a test this Monday. We're gonna have, we're having you don't have my Wednesday night class, right? Just,
I know when
no.
I woke up this morning, they were beat red, and I don't think it changed.
Yeah, we're not gonna have, our midterm and that will be next week.
You need
I know
some
my
guys.
body didn't do good. This is the one I didn't have the, because I was
Six.
hoping.
Yes, and so here's what we're gonna
Nice.
do. Here's what we're gonna do.
Hey, you
I graded that test.
got
I need you to study. I take it.
Yeah, because see, I'm in that dilemma, do I go home and finish
I don't know what I've
work
done.
class, or do I go home and take it
So
next
now,
class?
if you need to review with me, you make a time to come and review.
Well, how about you?
Yeah, we
So what day do you want to
And
take
then
it?
you sit in front of me in class.
That's up to
and
you.
talk
I
about
don't know what your schedule is. Are you done with
Mm,
basketball?
Yeah.
So you got some time to maneuver then. So,
I don't know, I've got like
I'll be
I've only
here
got like
Monday
a
at
page
noon.
left to read. But I'm not really sure.
and anytime afternoon, we can do
Okay.
that. All right?
Just finish it up.
And then Tuesday, you know my schedule.
Honestly, it's.
I mean, we're together all day on Tuesday, so.
And then look down, like, so I get the second that you have.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
good prices, I like.
So any of those, you make time and come and see me and I'll make it work.
Never read.
All right?
I never did the book before.
You want to see your test?
I did.
Yeah,
Yes.
I never.
Let me look and make sure. But I think you did. In here, you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes, you did.
When should I take it?
You'll need to review for it. Come to my office and review. And let me make sure you got the notes. And we'll review for it and then you can take it just whenever you get ready, okay?
And what should I do the same for the Monday one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you come to the office to review, we'll review for both.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
You just pick it out. USC test? You are, where you at? You're Austin, right? No. You're not Acres, cause he's up there, you're Ayers. You did well. Look, very bright. You're ready to go out and go to work. I wish you the best of luck. Only thing I wish I could get you to do is just speak up a little more in class. You're starting to do better, but I'd like to get you just to chime in a little more often. You've got a lot to share. All we gotta do is pull it out of you and get you to share it.
What time do you want me to come in?
One-ish.
One, okay, all right, I can do that. See you then.
I'll see you in a little bit.
Okay.
You won't be here Tuesdays, or we need to do between now and Thursday, other than read up on hate crime legislation.
Well, we're gonna talk about, racial profiling. I'm gonna get into racial profiling pretty hard, but you just make up the notes when you get back. And we'll, I'll take a test on Thursday, but you can make that when you get back. I've not even made that test yet.
Sounds good to me then. Is
All right.
that our midterm or Thursday test?
Yeah. I don't do cumulative midterms, I think that's silly.
Yeah.
I ain't too sure I wanna do cumulative, I'm a police officer, probably not do cumulative